any of you who might be just joining the symposium, I want to give the welcome to our fifth Hispanic Latinx Research and Creativity Symposium. My name is Kent Wilkinson. I'm director of the Thomas J. Harris Institute for Hispanic and International Communication in the College of Media and Communication at Texas Tech. I'm going to be serving as, I guess, co-moderator along with Curtis Bauer on this. We've already this morning had an informative panel on teaching at a Hispanic Serving Institution. I know some of you were able to join. We appreciate that. And then just had a very, I think the best word for me to use is inspiring discussion, a keynote address on literary translation and global communication with Aranaji of the University of Iowa. I think we could have kept that discussion going for at least another hour. It was very sort of intellectually provocative and stimulating in a lot of ways. Hopefully some of those ideas will carry over into this discussion, this panel on translation and interpretation. So in just a moment, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Curtis Bauer of the English department to make some introductory remarks about the potential for cross-disciplinary collaboration and on translation and interpretation here at Texas Tech University. But let me give a brief overview of sort of how we're going to structure the session. We have 5 speakers besides Curtis, each of whom will give a very brief, about 4-minute statement about how translation and interpretation connects to their particular fields and what their programs might contribute to a cross-disciplinary initiative that could include research and creative work as well as teaching. And then we'll dedicate about 10 minutes for the speakers to respond to one another, raise questions with each other, et cetera. And then we'll address audience questions in the last 10 to 15 minutes. And audience members can pose questions through the chat function or virtually raise their hand. There's a little button at the bottom of the participant window to be able to do that. So if you'd like to make some introductory remarks and Curtis, and then introduce our speakers, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Sure. Well, as you can see, we've got Alisa Wong here from the Honors College in History, Carmen Pereira-Muro from Classical and Modern Languages and Literatures, Jorge Zamora from the Spanish program within CMLL, as well as Carole Edwards from French in CMLL, and Jacob Baum from the History department. And I'm in the English program, or in the English department. And, I've been kind of going back and forth a little bit thinking, how did all of us come together in this group? And of course I sent a note out and invited people, but I could have sent this to any number of faculty from across the university, faculty I've worked with, but also faculty who think about work in translation. And as we've seen so far today, translation and interpretation are aspects that just permeate everything that we do. We communicate, and we're global communicators, right? We're getting information from around the world. Ronaji just mentioned that, I think he said 95% of news is coming through translation, right? And we might think about how that works. But this particular group is made up of those faculty who have talked about translation and interpretation. And they're also interested in giving our students an experience and exposure in the fields of these areas and meeting the unique needs of our growing population of Hispanic students. And I think what is also under the surface of all of this is that we're interested in putting our university's money where its mouth is, right? To think about, here we've got this status as an HSI, And, what does that mean? Something that I'm going to carry with me from Aaron's talk, and I'll try and bring that in later on in our conversation, is linguistic hospitality. He used this word that it's something that I think we need to keep in mind and take into consideration. So without me kind of now just continuing into my little presentation, Alisa, why don't you lead us off with your little spiel, if that would be okay? And then Carmen, Carole, Jacob, Jorge, and then I'll finish up, and then we can go into the questions.
Hi, everybody. It is such an honor to be on this panel. And it's lovely to see that, with this Hispanic Latinx Research and Creative Symposium, that it's not just the Spanish speakers or not just the people who are working in Spanish language sources that are included. And so it's lovely. I fake it all the time in pretending that I speak Spanish, don't speak Spanish at all. But a lot of Italianists, the cognates are close enough that we just fake it by putting an S on the ends of things, and it doesn't work, but we always try. And so I'm an Italianist by training. I am the associate dean, and so most people know me through my administrative role, but I found my way into academia because I am an Italianist and I work in Italian language sources. And so what I learned very early on was that reading a language, depending on which century you are reading that language in, reading documents based on what century you're in, makes a huge difference. And that translation is not just about moving words from one area to another, from one set of systems to another set of symbols, but is an entire process that you live and breathe. Whether that is translating and interpret systems of archives and libraries, whether that is pulling the documents out and understanding how writing works, how script works, how language works, whether that is trying to interpret the language for the century in which it is written and bringing it forward to the 20th and 21st centuries of levels of understanding, whether that is translating what we understand from those documents into language that scholars and non-scholars, popular readers, trade readers can understand. Taking that into the classroom, where, we are then teaching really complex situations and really complex topics to students who don't believe that they can master English, much less master 2, maybe 3 languages, because they just don't think it can all fit inside their heads. And so, that part of the work of learning to translate not just texts themselves, but translate cultures, translate systems in some ways too, and beyond translate, to interpret. I think that's, there's one thing that is translation, which, Claudio Magris talks about as a very, very difficult, complex process, but it's another thing to also interpret systems for people. It is a huge responsibility and a huge burden, and there's a lot of weight that comes with that. But the other work, and something that I'd like to see discussed a little bit in this forum today, is that we do a lot of translation work that isn't necessarily about language. So right now, we very proudly announced that we are now a Hispanic Serving Institution. That is not translated, and I use that term, funnily. We have not translated that to actually serving our Hispanic students, at least in my opinion. I don't believe that has really happened. What we have spent a lot of time is trying to translate what HSI means to a larger community. We have tried to interpret for the whiter community, or for other ethnic groups, racial groups on campus, what this might mean, how it might advantage them, how it will not disadvantage them, rather than really focusing on the fact that we have something really to celebrate, that we are truly diverse, that we have an opportunity for diversity, we have an opportunity for multiplicity of discipline, of perspective, of language, of culture, of experience, and that we must now make this not just a moment of translation. First, we have to focus on the original language, which is, how do we serve our Hispanic students, our Latinx students on this campus? From there, adjacent to, parallel with that discussion, is then how we translate and interpret that experience to the other parts of our community, to realize that they are part of that discussion and that they are part of that initiative. I don't think that that has happened. I am hoping that it will begin to happen, but I think that we need to make a concerted and deliberate effort to do that, because I don't believe it's happened on this campus yet. Carmen.
I unmute myself. Hola. So good to see everybody. I think I know most of you. I don't know some of you, but I'll introduce myself anyhow. I'm Carmen Pereira. I'm the chair of the Department of Classical and Modern Languages and Literatures. I always need to take a breath before saying the whole title. And Alisa, I think this is gonna work great, because you gave a very, like, this is what our values should be, no more of an abstract situation. And I can do a follow-up from experience, the experiences I have been having trying to implement a translation as a need in the department, as something the administration should be taking into consideration, as a degree as well. So I'll start going a little bit back in history. Translation is something that we always thought it should be one of the classes we're using in Spanish or in French. Carole has experience with this as well. But it wasn't until this year that we had the opportunity to have a search for someone that would cover that need. I mean, this is a drop in a bucket, because just having one person is not going to help with the whole situation. And the last spring, like towards the end of May, I went to a workshop for chairs of foreign languages departments for the United States. And in the presentations that they were giving us about new trends in the field, translation studies was the must. It was something that every respectable university was doing. They were seeing it as the future of languages. There was a dwindling numbers in students studying languages. So this was offering them a practical outlet. It's one of the highest paying jobs. I mean, for the practical side of things. And then for the value side of things is the way to really put our undergraduate students who are resisting taking languages into contact with the whole translation, not only of the languages, but having cultures and languages in contact in a very intimate manner. So we went ahead with this search that was difficult because we needed a linguist. We also needed a translator, and Curtis is my witness. He was part of the committee, and there is not much out there, who can fill this. There are professional translation schools, but they are not academic. So trying to find an academic scholar person who also did translation studies was hard. The search was successful. We're having someone starting with us next fall, and hopefully Jorge is going to join forces with him, and he's already planning and plotting to develop a certificate in Spanish for the professions. And one of the lines, I mean, the base of that is going to be a translation course, and then different lines coming out of that. Then, like, recent experiences with translation, this brings me directly to something very frank that Curtis said. The administration is not putting their money where their mouth is. When the whole COVID-19 crisis started, I noticed that nothing of this was being communicated in Spanish. And we are a Hispanic Serving Institution, and my daughter goes to UT. when she started last year, they asked her, in what language would your family like to receive the information coming from the university? And she said in Spanish. So I'm getting everything in Spanish. You know, the physical letters, the emails, everything. When I went to the orientation for parents, it was bilingual. They had subtitles in Spanish for everything. I'm perfect. I'm a Spanish teacher. I appreciate every single accent. Everything was like done to perfection. I was very proud. I was also humiliated, thinking, why don't we have this? No, in Texas Tech. And so I proposed to the office of the provost that we could try to, why don't we do this? You know, we have some faculty, some students who have been slightly trained to do this. We had a visiting professor organizing a translation lab, so we could try to do this. And they said, oh yeah, go ahead, do it. And I said, well, we need some resources. No, and they said, oh no resources. Just, you know, this should be because you're a good person. And your students should be happy to contribute to the committees. Like, yes, we are, but we cannot operate in this basis, no, assuming that this is a gift, no, that we offer. We have all the goodwill in the world, but there need to be resources in place, you know, for this. The students need to be compensated. This is time that they are using for this. So it is something that it should be, I think, a goal, an important mission of the university to fix this big wrong of not including Spanish as a language of communication, and also to establish some professionality, not this haphazard, oh, okay, if you have some spare student somewhere, you know, ask this person to translate these little things for us. No, it should be like a, you know, all over standardized system of translation. And I know Jorge and I have been discussing possibilities. Kent, we have in communication also, like how can we coordinate, you know, these efforts, because media and communication is also being very proactive about this. The School of Art also asked for our services for translating. They did pay our graduate students for translating their webpage, but there are these isolated efforts that they should be coordinated. So I'm super glad we're having this conversation with this group of people from different parts of the world.
Carmen, if I could interrupt, we're going to need to kind of give everyone the same amount of time. So if we could.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. It's okay. It's just that I want to make sure that Carole, Jacob, and Jorge also have some time, and then we can come back to this, because I think this is where we need to end up, right? We need to figure out how are we going to do some of these things, right, and what is this collective effort going to look like? How can we make that work?
And I'll let Jorge talk when he's talking about the recent experience we just had with the city of Lubbock, you know, with our need to cooperate with the wider community. So I leave it here. And Carole?
Carole, you're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for including me. I teach French and I'm a Francophone scholar. So this topic is, you know, of a lot of interest to me. And I did quite a few translation in the city for an African lady who had been injured. I did translation when there was the symposium, including African cotton growers. So I try to serve as much as I could, but I'll start with more mundane things. Like, you know, I initially developed the graduate course in advanced French translation after I returned from a graduate program review in the Caribbean at the University of Cave Hill in Barbados. They had asked me to lead the graduate review, and they almost were losing their French program. And they got completely revived thanks to including translation and interpretation. So I came back and that was in fall 2014. I came back and I was full of great ideas. Our students were dropping. And I thought, you know, we have also quite a few Francophone African students on campus. And this could be a way to attract students, graduate students from other fields, engineering, business, history, English, you know, if they're interested with the English-French translation. So I developed the course, and the students responded tremendously. Not everybody was on board colleague-wise. People thought we're about literature and nothing else. And my take on it is that if we don't move forward, we're going to be teaching empty chairs at some stage. Not everybody wants to go into teaching the high school level, at higher education. So we have to offer French for professionals. So there's, you know, the service component of translation, you know, service not only for what Alisa and Carmen were saying for the university, and but also, you know, for the profession, because this is a great outlet. People make great money. And so when I started this course, I always added, made it a point to invite a professional translator. Actually, a friend of mine who didn't get tenure at Emory University, and he told us this was the best thing that could have happened to him because he's a very, very happy translator. And he specialized now in legal translation, but he's doing extremely well. So we've diversified our degree. We've added theory, film, translation. And so that meant I had to learn about translation strategies, which were great because my goal was also to take the translator's exam. And to appeal to, you know, also a various population for literary, journalistic, consumer-oriented, medical translation, and legal, to also serve our community. And this is where I stepped in, but also I had two students. There was a lawsuit with a local vineyard, and one of our students who graduated with a master's was the legal translator, and I think she was making like $500 a day, so she was thrilled when this happened. But this showed that there was also opening, so it was not only growing us as a community and involving, you know, our departments together, but also to serve our population. What else? I try to be fast. So my goal also was to stress intercultural competences, especially with African countries. I know that a lot of the feedback of some of our African students is like, oh my God, you know, this is so great. You know, where else are we going to learn about how somebody from the Ivory Coast interacts with, you know, somebody from Senegal? And so, you know, my native French students were saying, we've learned so much about Africa taking this course, which was, you know, I was very happy to hear that. And so students' works were contextualized and in a global environment. And this has been part of the discourse at TTU also, is that, you know, we want to make our students global citizens, and translation fits right in our effort to reach that goal. And I also helped one of the students enter the competition at the United Nations. It was One World Essay Contest, and she was picked. So thanks to the translation intercultural course, you know, there are other ways to just put our students and our university on the map. And it's just not only to provide our students with a translation experience, but just to give them that versatility. And I think that if we could come up with a global certificate, then you know, that several departments could be a part of, that we would really reach our goal. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Jacob, do you want to go next?
Sure. Thank you for inviting me, Curtis, and thank you, Kent, for hosting, and thanks to everyone who's here today. I should start by saying that I don't really consider myself a specialist in translation work. I have done a fair amount of translation work, but my own area of expertise is late medieval and early modern German history. And so I have done some translation of very old documents out of a very sort of archaic form of German and or Latin and some other languages on occasion. But I think, you know, one thing that my work could sort of bring to the conversation here is to help kind of build on some of the points that were already made by Carole and Alisa, cultivating intercultural competency, sensitivity to cultural difference, really because the cultural distance to the between our time now and the time that I study oftentimes feels really, really great. It seems like it's very alien. So, you know, this is a period, this is the early modern period. It's a period when we're moving towards modernity, at least historians like to kind of talk about it that way. And so some of the most foundational ideas and assumptions and sort of categories that we take for granted in our world today are just starting to take shape at this time. And a lot of my work, my actual sort of research work, the core of it focuses on how these newly forming ideas are interacting with regular people in their daily lives. But, you know, these ideas, they're not quite modern yet. We're not in the modern period. People still think and act in ways that seem pretty alien to modern sensibilities. The life world they inhabit is very different. It's a pre-industrial, pre-technological kind of world, I suppose. And therefore, one of the central problems that I deal with, to kind of bring it back to the theme of translation, is how to translate the recorded experiences of these people who live in such a different world into an idiom that's accessible and meaningful to a sort of modern, postmodern audience. So the specific example that I'm working on right now actually is a translation project. It's a diary of a deaf shoemaker from the 16th century, from 16th century German city. This man who lost his hearing at a very young age and then recorded an exceptionally detailed diary of his experiences. So today, you know, he would be read as a deaf man. I've labeled him as deaf, but he never uses that term to describe himself. There's no sort of modern vocabulary of disability that he can kind of reach out to and use to describe his experiences. And so, you know, one of the problems that I'm working on right now is how to kind of translate his experience in a way that will kind of make sense for people today. Yeah, so, you know, further ideas about, you know, how our program in history, I'm thinking specifically in history, how history could contribute to a broader sort of translation initiative would be just probably to come back to some of the points that Alisa has already made, to cultivate a greater awareness of multiple perspectives, different places, cultures, of course, but also times, different temporalities, right? People a long time ago thought and experienced the world in a way that's quite different than people do so today. My own time period, I think, is a really good place to look to kind of make that idea really concrete, because it like as I say, it's in some respects so different from the world we live in now. And I found in my class, and this is just sort of a kind of a small idea, it's not nearly as kind of ambitious as some of the big picture ideas that have already been put out there, but one thing that I do in my classes that I found is an effective way to to sort of get students to understand this cultural distance is to look at pre-modern autobiographical writing and to work on trying to translate some of it into more modern idioms. And students are often surprised by how different people wrote about themselves, 400, 500 years ago. And so they quickly realized that even working in documents that were originally written in English, that work is also a work of translation, sort of translating English from the past into sort of a modern idiom is a really challenging task. So I guess that's kind of what I prepared, but I'd be excited to continue the conversation.
Great, thanks, Jorge.
Guys, hi. I'll make it short. First, kudos to you all on this 5th symposium you've organized. Super kudos for doing it under these circumstances. So, congratulations and thanks for inviting me. Thanks for doing this, and triple kudos for that speaker, Aaron. Unfortunately, I was a little bit late for several reasons, but anyway, what I listened to really had me. I'm glad I was muted because I kept saying yes, yes. Basically, my background comes from. I won't mention too much about what we're doing because Carmen and Carole have already talked about that. I'll expand a little bit, but basically, my background comes from law, and we always used to have a constant argument with our translators. And we would always say, what you're delivering to us, what we have here is not a translation of the agreement. And what we have is a Spanish version of the agreement. And I always tell that in my Spanish for law class, because it is important that they see both as equivalent versions. And that's the same with our languages. We're not just translating. It's not just a translation. It's a whole. It's the same universe looked at in a different way, and that's kind of what Aaron was talking about. And I just see our mission in this whole idea of translation is, on the one hand, we have to promote it as we have to make a sale and show students how they can use the language, like Aaron said, how it's useful to them. And then we have to do our deeper mission, which is showing them they're not just going to use it as professionals, but it's going to make them better humans. And that's the part that you don't sell until you're there with them. And they start to understand what Jacob was talking about, what Carole was talking about, what we're all talking about is how it makes you see the world in a broader, better way, and certainly what Aaron was talking about. So once we get them in and we show them this is how you can use it, we will show them the stuff that Aaron was telling us about making us better humans, giving us better understanding of each other, helping us deal with the world, negotiating. Negotiating is a translation is a big part of negotiation, because half the time you don't understand not just the other language, you don't understand everything else that goes with it. We just had a great experience, practical experience. I really enjoyed it, even though it was challenging. Carmen and I, she got, I think the Chamber of Commerce is trying to put out some of the announcements for the emergency funds for the Spanish businesses, and we were translating that with our graduate students. And there was a lot of, and it just took me back to how you have to reinterpret some of the stuff that you're looking at, not just transfer it into Spanish. The challenges I also see, and I know I'm getting ahead of everything, is technology. Technology is a tool that is definitely enhanced what we can do, but it also puts us at a disadvantage, making people think that technology is everything, that all they have to do is Google this and Google that, and it's translated already. And by the same token, we have to see just how much it removes the task of what we have to do and allows us to move on to bigger and better enhancement of what we do. Anyway, that's basically my 2 cents. So thanks again for inviting me, and let's keep going.
Great. I'm just going to add one quick little anecdote of kind of what I feel like my task is in the Department of English. I'm the director of the creative writing program, and I'm a literary translator, and I teach creative writing and comparative lit. But I often bring people, or I try to bring people's attention to the fact that we're always reading work in translation. And it's something I think that we don't think about. We just take for granted that we're reading Roland Barthes or Latour or Derrida or any of these theorists in the original, right? We're reading them in English, but they've been translated. And so I talk to my colleagues about this frequently. And when I'm talking to my graduate students about why they have a requirement as like a language requirement for their PhD or for their graduate studies, oftentimes they don't understand what that's about, what they can do with such a thing. And Aaron was also addressing that in his talk, where he was mentioning we need to make people or help them become aware of what can be done with language. Yes, there's a requirement. You're a historian, you're doing your PhD, you're an Italianist, Alisa, right? You're reading work in translation, but it's also, you're thinking about how it has been translated. Maybe some nuance that has been missed. That's the real skill, right? That we can go to. Not just, oh, I'm gonna go look at this in the original and then compare it to what I've seen, to say that I can. No, it's actual scholarship, right? So with that, as well as a number of other things, I feel like that's one thing that we can do across the board to really consider how, just to say, here we are, we're doing this already. We're looking at translation and it's everywhere, all right? So Kent, how do we want to do this?
Yeah, I just want to make some very quick comments about what I see the College of Media and Communication being able to contribute here, because I think there's a very important industrial element to this. These are interfaces with business, right? Jorge was alluding to that, and also the technological aspect. I mean, I think our students could certainly benefit from the different perspectives that all of you have identified in those elements, but I think it's also important for students in other programs to have some pretty solid understanding of how the industry functions, right? What are realistic expectations in terms of whether they're doing freelance work or, maybe working for a big translation company, et cetera, just some of the basic, principles behind the management, so you can get those expectations in alignment. And then also the technology side of it. I mean, my understanding is that people aren't just, at least on some of the more, I guess, policy documents or legal documents, or, perhaps some of the internal corporate documents. They're not sitting down and reading the text and translating it. They're running it through a translation program and then cleaning it up. And there are different sort of levels of ability and complexity of vocabularies that are being drawn from, et cetera. But it's really this relationship between the translator and the technology that I think we could certainly contribute on the media and comm side. And as I said, I think it would be invaluable for our students who are interested in doing that kind of work to be required to take some coursework in the other departments that are represented here in programs. I think now we should give an opportunity for the folks who have presented to respond to each other, have a little sort of internal dialogue, if you will, and then open it up for everyone. And
yeah, I want to just throw something out that I think is really, really maybe connective tissue for all of us. And there's a book by a Princeton scholar named David Bellows called "Is That a Fish in Your Ear?" And it talks about translation process and a little bit of theory and everything. But there's a chapter in this book in which he talks about European Union translators and how those European Union translators are multilingual, right? So it's not just one language or two languages, but several languages, all from the European community. But all of them, in addition to being translators, are also lawyers or engineers or agronomers or physicians, right? So I think that this is the real strength of this particular group, but also the potential for a program at Texas Tech, because we have such a rich community to be thinking about that connection beyond just studying translation. It's studying law and translation, right? Or studying law through translation, or translation through law, or medicine, or linguistics, or business. So we need to, this is how I feel like we're going to be moving forward into that world that Aaron was talking about, right? Where everywhere else they're doing this, except here, right? Except in the US.
Are there any comments that folks would like to make, or replies to what one of the prior speakers mentioned?
Well, I agree with what Curtis was saying, definitely. And again, I'm always thinking of how to promote the idea to the student body and to the student body's parents who pay the bill, is how translation can enhance whatever it is you want to do as a first profession. That's the first step. Eventually, there will be a chance for somebody to just want to do translation as is. But I want to sell the idea based on Aaron's, and I know I'm talking about sales, is kind of a counter intuitive, but the idea that translators, real translators, are real humanists. Kind of the medieval idea, Jacob, of translating as a global universal humanist that interprets culture, history, and knowledge in general. I mean, you can be, like Curtis is saying, an engineer, but you look at yourself in a different way. So I think that's a really important aspect of how we want to see ourselves as a translating body, or I don't know how else to call it.
No, and I think you're absolutely right. I think that, Jorge and Jacob and Carole and Carmen have all talked about the idea that we are constantly in translation, translating, interpreting. We are being interpreted. And so it's a constant process. It's a constant state of being. And I think that for people who are often monolingual, they don't think of it that way. They're not considering it. But as Jake brought up, right, we also translate from English to English, from century to century, from generation to generation. And so we're constantly doing this without putting a label or a name or giving a sense of intellectualism to it, right? And so we have to understand that cultural code switching is a form of translation, is a form of interpretation. And so I think that the more that we can bring this so that it's not just the realm of the linguist, it's not just the realm of the lit people, right? But like, for instance, the historians, I tell all of my students who want to do work in Italian or any form of European history, right? If you do not have the time to spend abroad, you will never learn the codes and the symbols in order to be able to do proper and professional and sensitive translation work. You really do need to spend some time, because it's not, as Carole was saying, just about, one word translated into another language, right? It is how that word changes according to the system in which you're in, according to which century you're in. As Jorge was bringing up, whether it's in law or in engineering or in computer science, whatever it is in, it's not a unidirectional or even just, bi-directional kind of system. It is multi-directional and it is multifaceted. And I think that that's something that we need to recognize and that we struggle with in the Honors College as well. Most of our students in the Honors College are not humanities majors. The majority of them are STEM majors. Most of them are pre-med majors. I keep telling my students, especially who decide that they want to go into health professions, if you do not learn Spanish now, if you do not learn to understand cultural systems now, you will not be as an effective physician as you hope one day to be. And that's not just about learning another language, right? Just being able to, order at a restaurant or, be a tourist, in Barcelona. This is really about, can you navigate with sensitivity, with empathy, and with understanding what the other person is trying to say to you? And can you speak back in that tone and in that timbre? And so, I'm agreeing with everything that's going on here. I'd like to ask Carmen, with your experiences I think you were talking about UT and about kind of going to some of the programs there. A number of us who are on the HSI committee had recommended that Texas Tech include an interpretation ceremony or some kind of technical opportunity, technical, gizmo that if parents wanted to listen to convocation or wanted to participate in commencement or wanted to be a part of orientation, that it would be as simple as, if you have a cell phone, right, you have an app, you can put, headphones on, and there would be someone who had a pre-recorded message or who could do a live kind of live translation. We thought about, there's sign language interpreters at commencement, right? Or there used to be, now we have the subtitling, could we do something like that that's kind of simultaneous translation? And the struggle that we came up against was that there were some people who were in the majority population or who did not speak Spanish who said, well, that would be privileging, right? That ceremony. And so then, would we have to do it for Chinese? Would we have to do it for, German? Would we have to do it for all of these other communities? Many of the people on HSI committee, the response was, but we're HSI. This is an acknowledgement that we have reached a certain population, and this is a respectful gesture to acknowledging the fact that our culture and our campus has changed. And Carmen, if you would just talk a little bit about how that wasn't a problem at UT, right?
Sorry, I missed the end.
No, so when your experience at UT, that wasn't a question. That wasn't even brought up, right?
No, that was not even brought up. And they are like us, Hispanic Serving Institution, and this is what you have to do. It is not a question of if, it's like you have to, But one thing I was thinking the other day, because the surprise of the administration, we never thought about this. We never thought we should be translating these messages about COVID, because maybe the parents of our students they are much more comfortable receiving this in Spanish, and it had never crossed their minds, no? And it's again the power of translation as cultural interpretation, because all the upper administration is monolingual. Mm-hmm. There is not, they don't even know a little bit of another language, nothing. So if you don't have it in you, if you have never had the experience, if you have never been exposed, you are not going to put yourself in the place of other people that need to navigate in between languages. So of course it never is not out of malice or anything. It never occurs to you, no, that this happens to other people.
No, and I think that was the experience, Kent. If you remember, Kent, when we were talking about the Dream Center and we were talking about putting together the website, And I think maybe it was you and me together when we suggested that the Dream Center, the information on the Dream Center, while, DACA students include people from all different nations, but the majority here at Texas Tech do happen to be Spanish speaking. And we asked that the website be translated, and there was a little, oh, we never thought of that before. And it seemed so obvious, I think, to many of us.
Yeah, well, and I think that's why it's important to have, committees that are comprised of, faculty, staff, administrators, so these sorts of things come up. Otherwise, we're in our little enclaves and, similar to, what Curtis was alluding to earlier. I mean, we've got all this translation work going on in different colleges and different programs. Well, we shouldn't be doing it independently. And I think Aron gave the perfect reasons why, it needs to be a comprehensive effort. But, I think, and, it's not a comfortable topic, but there are, certain prejudices in, Texas and in this region about, tied in with language. And I think, there's still a legacy. I don't think people are actively thinking, oh, gee, I'm going to have, some kind of a, diminished attitude toward, another language or whatever. But I think that still sort of lurks there, and that we need to be advocates. Certainly our students and their parents appreciate it in the times that they do get to interact with us, as faculty or staff, or, they do get information in Spanish. We used to do orientation in Spanish. I know because I went, and helped with that. I don't know if that's still happening, but it ought to be a must, right? And maybe Joby was, responsible for that, because I think it was when she was still at the Cross-Cultural Academic Advancement Center. But anyway, I think we need to keep persistent in the messaging. And if we do have a collaborative group, then it's not just one or two of us from a particular college or program reaching out, but we're doing it collectively. And I think it's a lot, harder to put that on the back burner or ignore it if it's coming from, multiple sides of the university. And, as was mentioned in a previous panel, getting, staff involved as well. We've got the LHFSA, the Latino Hispanic Faculty and Staff Association, which frankly I wish had a stronger voice and presence in some of the HSI discussions, because they've been around for more than 15 years now and are really in touch with a lot of the stuff that's going on at both campuses in terms of Hispanic, Latinx students, faculty, and staff. And maybe it's incumbent on us to press for those things, insist on them.
I'd like to add something also. We talked mainly about translation strategies, Curtis, when you mentioned, having just the strategy and then the knowledge of the topic. I remember I had to do a medical translation for endodontics, and I knew nothing about how to put implants. Well, I had to go look and just try to understand how things were done before I could translate anything and make sense of it. But so that's from the linguistics perspective. But even with the term Hispanic, there's just so many cultures. We're only talking from a linguistics perspective. We're not really talking about separating Tejanos from, Latin Americans from Spanish, even that would be a big challenge to address all the cultures within the linguistics, group. So that's also it's already very nice to have, Hispanic serving, but, how can we celebrate? How can we, give everybody this as much importance? How do people know, what does that mean even?
Yeah, I think that's, this is where I kind of go back to that hiring committee for classical and modern languages. The person that CMLL ended up hiring has experience in both translation and interpretation. And I think that that's going to be really helpful for this, to be thinking of how to move beyond the academic community and into broader, kind of, I don't want to say real life because we're in a real life community, but the community outside of Texas Tech, right, into Lubbock, into West Texas, and thinking about the lives that these students have of, what kind of work are they doing, have they been doing as heritage language speakers? Just growing up with in families that maybe they were the bilingual students, right? Or the bilingual members of the family, and they were doing work. And I think, this idea that going back to the linguistic hospitality that Aaron was talking about, to consider the openness to understanding these different communities we're working with, and also who are around us that we are working with. Not, that they're coming in, but also we're here and we have to be adaptive. We have to meet their needs, right? It's not just, this is what I'm going to teach you, but what can we teach each other? And I think that we're on track, at least I had that hope, in the conversations we had in CMLL about how to start making some of these things happen. But what also gives me hope from this conversation is that there is a core group of faculty, now participating here, but also I see Jorge Ramirez from the law school is here, and I know that he's done this work, and I know that, in architecture, they're interested in translation as well. So we just have to figure out a way to bring people together and say, okay, maybe it's not the administration that's creating this committee to do HSI work, but group of faculty and staff, local members who are saying, okay, this is what we're going to do, and you're going to listen to us. Carmen, you're going to be our leader.
I keep forgetting that I'm mute. I have to say, we just uncovered this urgent need for translation. From the moment I reached out to the provost office and said, we can help with this, the amount of people writing and saying, we have heard you translate. They'll write to me. Like they want me to translate things for them, but from advertisements from the university, I was like, no, But this is the thing, we need to have some kind of organized procedure, for this, because some things that are super like urgent, needed, like what Jorge worked on yesterday, to have the communication of how a Hispanic business in town could receive money, federal money, that needed to be translated like super rapido, and thank goodness Jorge was there and took care of it. But there needs to be some centralized organism where these needs can be covered and addressed, not this makeshift. So yeah, Chris Cook, the director of marketing and communication, wrote to me, said, I have been told that you do translations. Can you translate this for me? That was small, so I did that because our TA1, who is doing the translation for everything, had enough in his plate. And then after that, I got another request. And then and I told you, we open the speed, right. And now this is going to be a nightmare.
Well, I wonder if there could be some kind of practicum or some kind of, internship where the students who, out of CMLL who are interested in translation and interpretation could become this kind of cohort, this kind of group. Jorge, yes.
Yeah, we're working on it. That's part of the project. We're going to include, the idea is to include it as a social aspect to the courses, and definitely an internship. Yes.
I also think that, right now is the opportunity for this group, for interested bodies to say, this is more important than me donating my time to do this. I mean, we all have a lot to do, and the university has resources. I'm not saying, hey, I want to get paid to do everything, but someone needs to do this professionally, and someone needs to dedicate energy, you know, focused energy on this, instead of, oh, I'll do it when I finish my preparation for my classes, or I'll do it when I can do these other things. That isn't how this works.
There has to be a cultural shift, and I think that's what you're all talking about. The mere fact that the university is coming to and say, oh yeah, this is very important, why don't you do it? I mean, it reminds me of that old saying about, Ginger Rogers did everything that Fred Astaire did, except, backwards and in high heels. They're asking us to do it ourselves, the Hispanic, the underserved Hispanic community to do it themselves. We've already got enough things to do. And the other thing is, the group that I'm looking at here on the screen, it's always the same group, which is like, we've got tons of stuff to do. We should not be the same 10 or 15 people that are doing all the work. The university has resources. There needs to be a real cultural shift to say, look, stop putting it on our backs. I mean, we don't mind doing a little bit of the work, but we got a lot of work already to do ourselves, and we shouldn't be additionally imposed upon. So I'm insulted by what they told Carmen. You can do it, but no money. I'm going to stop.
That's the ongoing story, and especially in translation overall. It's like, oh, here's this sheet, translate it. And I always tell my students to say no, because unless they have decided on how much they're going to get paid first. Yeah, one of our big missions, and Carmen and I have been talking about this too, and Carole too, it's selling it to the administration. And if we show them how it can bring in, how it's going to benefit them, then they'll put the money down. And the only way it's going to benefit, or one of the biggest ways, is to have more recruitment, interest of the students, and to show how it's going to bring something further. It's going to benefit the university. And another aspect of that is the Hispanic Serving Institution. That's money. I mean, I hate to put it in those terms, but that's what it is. And we as a university need to justify that money. So that's part of the angles. We have to think of it, because or else they're not going to react. It's always going to be, oh yeah, here, could you fix this thing that I did on Google Translate? You shouldn't take more than 10 minutes. I don't have 10 minutes. Yeah.
No, and I find it really funny, because I doubt that anybody would go to Magda Toda and say, hey, I have, this math problem. Magda, can you add this up for me, right? And so I think, or go to Lawrence, right? Hey, President Stupanek, right? I can't get the math, the multiplication to work. Could you multiply this for me, right? And so I understand, the inclination, also CML, like stepping up to do this is an amazing, amazing thing. But my guess is, and this is, you've probably already done this, is that most universities, especially Hispanic Serving Institutes, have an office or an internship program, as you are trying to develop, right, where they have a group of professional or pre-professionals that they are training to do this work. It is an investment, right? And I think that's, that's the reason why Jorge keeps saying, sales, and, Jorge Ramirez, right, is saying, they have the funds, right? This is an investment. And if we are going to serve, which is the most important part of HSI, I think, is the word serving, right? To serve, right? We haven't done that. And so we need to, as I think it was Curtis who said it, make them put their money where their mouth is.
Yeah, we do. This is great. Carmen, you're muted.
Who's going to write the manifesto?
No, I know, but before I unmute myself and cut someone else and raising my hand. So I see two things here that interrelated. One, we need to form students to be able to become translators, and to help with some of the translations, to have like a translation lab or a certificate, where they have capstone projects that are translations for the university. Carole had this wonderful idea for her translation class, to translate our webpage, the French part, into French, for So because we need to do that also in our departmental webpage, which is only in English, I have to say. So we should start in our own house. So form students, but also bring professionals, because we cannot ask, some student who is starting, like, here, take care of this very important document that needs to be translated. And from the international cultural, what's the name of it? The ICC. They are also requesting us to do translations, and these are important legal documents. That there should be someone that is, really qualified to do this kind of translation. We cannot rely on the students we are forming. No, in the future they will do it.
Carmen, do you remember when they lost all of our transcripts when they were trying to certify the faculty? And so we all had to turn in our transcripts again for SAC COC accreditation. And so a bunch of our international faculty, wrote back to India, wrote back to Italy, or wrote back to Spain to find their old transcripts from university, decades ago. Well, when they did that, I think Stefano and I got a couple from some Italian colleagues. We got it from the provost office asking if we would translate these Italian transcripts, and we're like, you understand, we work, my husband works in 16th and 17th century documents. I work in 19th and 20th century. We don't know the legal language, right, of this academic language. It's not that because you speak a language that you can automatically become a translator, right? I mean, there's an expertise, there's a finesse. And so we're like, you want us to what? Because there are professional services, right, that do this, that certify it. And I think that lack of understanding that it's not, again, what Jorge Zamora was saying, right? It is not just about, can you translate, right? Bread to pan, to pane, right?
To pan, right? Translate this to Italian.
Exactly. That's not the way it works. Have any of you read the book by Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Decolonizing the Mind?
No.
It's a really, really old, I'm saying really old as a historian. I think it was written in the 1980s, and it's by a Nigerian writer, who, with decolonization, was trying to decolonize his mind and figure out what language he was going to write in. And he discovered that, he was trained in English. He had gone to Britain for school. He had always, published in the English language. And to try to go back to one of the Nigerian dialects meant he would lose his audience. He didn't know how to form, because he'd always been writing in this translated language. I think one of the other important parts, and I think all of Kent's and Curtis's conversations today could last for about 14 hours. But one of the important parts in Ngugi wa Thiong'o asks, right, is we always burden the person who is the non-English speaker with seeking the alternative, or with seeking help, or with seeking the translation. What Carmen is talking about is offering it from the very beginning, making it already available, making it a part of our culture, making it a part of who we are as an institution, takes the burden away from the person who is marginalized or who does not speak English, and places the burden on us to be welcoming and to include this sense of belonging. I think ultimately that's what we're all talking about.
Hospitality.
Yes,
right?
absolutely, 100%.
Hospitality, right?
Yes.
And generosity, and yeah.
So Alisa, I was not the chair when the transcript thing happened, when they lost all of them, but I remember Erin, who was the chair, being furious because from math they sent all the transcripts from the Russians. No, I said
oh no.
You do Russian, so please translate all this. And she refused. She said, I am not a maid.
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
I am a professional. If you want my professional services, then act professionally.
Yes.
With this.
I think
that's the attitude we should have, no?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's important institutional history for us to keep in mind moving forward, not to dwell on it, but to face the reality of sort of that's where we are. I think there's been some great discussion here. Maybe I'm suggesting, Curtis, you and I could sort of powwow to get our notes together and maybe just sort of come up with overview of what was discussed and some points moving forward. I would hate for us to lose some of the momentum like I feel like we've gained early this afternoon with the keynote and this excellent discussion. And of course, when we get to the academic year, it's easy for things to get, ignored, but let's really try not to do that, especially because we're going to have all this time on our hands as we're sequestered at home. And if you start getting, bored or antsy, let's work on the translation and interpretation project.
And one other thing, Kent, I'm assuming that, you're recording all of these, right? Will you make these recordings available to us?
Yes.
Okay, because I think all of you, if you haven't had a chance to see, or if you didn't make it to Aaron's talk, even though he was addressing, like, the title of it was Literary Translation and Global Communication, he's bringing all of this in, right? And he's talking about humanities, and he's talking about kind of this vision that we've got for what it means to really get a college degree, right? And not just in one area, but to be a university student and to think about communication and getting out. But so if we can have access to those, I think that will also be really helpful.
Yeah, we'll figure out a way to make that happen, probably through a link, but I'm
share
not sure.
space. Okay,
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all. This has been fantastic.